The year was 1977. In the quiet, unassuming borough of Enfield in North London, life moved at a steady, predictable pace. The streets were lined with modest council houses, their brick facades a testament to post-war resilience and the simple aspirations of working-class families. Number 284 Green Street was one such house, indistinguishable from its neighbours. It was home to Peggy Hodgson, a single mother doing her best to raise her 4 children. Margaret, age 13, Janet, 11, Johnny, 10, and Billy, 7. Their lives, though not always easy, were ordinary. They were a typical family, navigating the daily challenges of school, chores, and the simple joys of growing up in a close-knit, if sometimes noisy, household. The house itself was plain, a 2-story dwelling that had seen better days. The wallpaper was slightly faded, the furniture was well worn, and the floors creaked with the memory of countless footsteps. It was a home filled with the usual clutter of family life. School books on the table, toys scattered in the corners, and the faint, lingering smell of tea and toast. Nothing about its appearance suggested it would soon become the epicenter of one of the most documented and debated paranormal cases in British history. It was just a house, a place of shelter and routine, until one late summer evening when the routine was irrevocably shattered, and the shelter it offered became a source of profound and inexplicable terror. Life for the Hodgsons had been a struggle since Peggy's recent and difficult divorce. Money was tight, and the responsibility of raising 4 children alone weighed heavily on her shoulders. Yet, she was a resilient woman, determined to provide a stable and loving environment for her children. They were a boisterous but happy group. Margaret, the eldest, was entering her teenage years with a quiet maturity. Janet was a lively, imaginative girl with a gap-toothed smile, while her younger brothers, Johnny and Billy, filled the house with the typical energy of young boys. They were a family bound by affection, weathering their difficulties together, completely unaware of the strange and unsettling chapter that was about to begin in their lives. The late 1970s in Britain was a time of social and economic change, but in suburbs like Enfield, a sense of tradition and normalcy prevailed. Neighbours knew each other, children played freely in the streets, and the evening news was filled with stories of strikes and political debates, not whispers of the supernatural. The world outside 284 Green Street was grounded in a firm reality. Inside, however, that reality was about to be turned upside down. The ordinary brick and mortar of their home would soon bear witness to events so bizarre and frightening that they would draw the attention of the world, transforming this simple council house into a place of legend and fear.
Mum, the beds are shaking. They're moving on their own.
Oh, come on now. Stop messing about and go to sleep.
But Mum, it's really happening. Please come and see.
The strange occurrences began subtly, almost comically, on the evening of August 30th, 1977. After putting her children to bed, Peggy Hodgson heard Janet complaining from the room she shared with her brother Johnny. The children insisted their beds were wobbling and shaking on their own. Peggy, tired from a long day, initially dismissed their claims as childish antics. A familiar attempt to delay bedtime, she told them to stop messing around and go to sleep. But their pleas became more insistent, their voices tinged with a genuine fear that made her pause. She went upstairs to their room, checked the beds, and found nothing amiss. She tucked them in again, offering a reassuring word before turning off the light. A few moments later, the calls came again, this time more frantic. Peggy returned to the bedroom, her patience wearing thin. As she stood in the doorway, she heard a soft, shuffling sound. A heavy chest of drawers, which had stood against the wall for years, slid several inches across the floor. She stared, disbelieving what she had just witnessed. It was impossible. The chest was far too heavy for her children to move, especially so quickly and quietly. She pushed it back into place, her heart beginning to pound with a mixture of confusion and a creeping sense of dread. As soon as she turned her back, it slid out again, this time with a decisive grating noise. Panic began to set in.
Come on, we're leaving now.
Peggy gathered her frightened children and hurried them out of the house, seeking refuge with their neighbours, Vic and Peggy Nottingham. She tried to explain what had happened, her words tumbling out in a rush of fear and disbelief. Vic, a burly builder, was sceptical but agreed to go over and investigate. He entered the Hodgson house expecting to find a rational explanation, perhaps a prank or a structural issue. He walked through the rooms, tapping on walls and checking the floors. As he stood in the living room, he heard a distinct knocking sound coming from the walls, a rhythmic tap-tap-tap that seemed to follow him as he moved. Vic Nottingham searched the entire house, from the attic to the cellar, but found no source for the strange noises. There were no loose pipes, no pests in the walls, nothing that could explain the persistent knocking. The sound seemed to emanate from the very structure of the house itself, a hollow and deliberate rapping that defied all logic. He left the house feeling unsettled, unable to offer the Hodgsons any comfort or explanation. The family spent the night huddled together at the Nottingham's home, too terrified to return. The unseen force had made its presence known, and the peace of 284 Green Street was gone, replaced by a chilling and unshakable sense of being watched. The following day, the disturbances escalated. The knocking sounds, which had so unnerved Vic Nottingham, became a constant and unnerving presence in the house. They would start and stop without warning, sometimes a faint rhythmic tapping, other times a loud violent banging that resonated through the walls and floors. The family felt as if they were living inside a drum, with an invisible player tormenting them at all hours. The sounds seemed to have a malevolent intelligence, often responding to their conversations or movements. If someone asked it to knock 3 times, it would often oblige, a chilling confirmation that they were not alone in the house. Feeling desperate and out of her depth, Peggy Hodgson decided she had no choice but to call the police. On September 8th, woman police constable Carolyn Heaps arrived at 284 Green Street. She listened patiently to Peggy's frantic story, her professional training urging her to look for a logical explanation. Like Vic Nottingham before her, she was deeply skeptical. She assumed it was a case of noisy neighbors, faulty plumbing, or perhaps a family dispute manifesting in strange ways. She entered the living room, prepared to document a routine domestic call, but what she witnessed would be anything but routine. As WPC Heaps stood with Peggy in the living room, a kitchen chair, positioned several feet away, suddenly lifted off the floor. It hovered for a moment before sliding across the room, coming to rest about 4 feet from its original position. There were no strings, no wires, nothing to explain its movement. The officer stared in stunned silence, unable to process what she had just seen. She later signed a written statement confirming the event, noting, "I saw a large armchair move unaided 4 feet across the floor." The incident was so inexplicable that her male colleague, who was outside at the time, refused to even enter the house. The police, finding no evidence of a crime, could do nothing. They left, leaving the Hodgsons to face their invisible tormentor alone. The incident with the police officer marked a turning point. The family's terror was now validated by an impartial witness, a figure of authority. Yet this validation brought no comfort, only a deeper sense of helplessness. If the police couldn't help, who could? The phenomena grew bolder. Small objects like marbles, Lego bricks, and other toys began to fly across rooms, seemingly thrown by an unseen hand. They would often be hot to the touch when picked up. The family lived in a constant state of high alert, flinching at every sound, never knowing what object would be hurled next, or what piece of furniture would suddenly lurch into motion. Their home had become a hostile environment, a place of fear rather than safety. The relentless paranormal activity began to take a severe toll on the Hodgson family. Sleep became a luxury they could rarely afford. The nights were the worst, filled with the incessant knocking, the sound of furniture being dragged across the floorboards overhead, and the terrifying spectacle of objects flying through the darkened rooms. The children were exhausted and petrified, often waking up screaming.
I don't want to go to bed, Mum. Please don't make me go back in there.
I know, love, I know. But we don't have anywhere else to go.
Janet, in particular, seemed to be at the center of the phenomena. She would be thrown from her bed by an invisible force or would levitate in her sleep, her body held rigid and suspended in the air, only to be dropped unceremoniously back onto her mattress. The fear was not confined to the walls of 284 Green Street. It began to seep out into the neighborhood. The Nottinghams and other nearby residents could often hear the loud banging and crashing noises coming from the Hodgson house at all hours. They saw the flashing lights, which some described as resembling lightning inside the rooms, even on clear nights. Whispers and rumors spread quickly through the quiet suburban streets. Some neighbors were sympathetic, offering what little support they could, while others grew fearful, shunning the family and their haunted house. The Hodgsons found themselves increasingly isolated, trapped not only by the entity in their home, but also by the fear and suspicion of their community.
People at school keep staring at me. They say our house is cursed.
Just try to ignore them, Margaret. We know the truth, and that's what matters.
Peggy Hodgson was at her wit's end. She was a mother watching her children suffer, powerless to protect them from a threat she couldn't see or understand. Her daughter Janet was bearing the brunt of the activity, often complaining of being choked or pushed by unseen hands. The strain was immense, pushing the family to the brink of collapse. Peggy's face, etched with worry and fatigue, told the story of countless sleepless nights and the constant grinding anxiety of living in a state of siege. She felt utterly alone, abandoned by the authorities who could offer no help, and viewed with suspicion by some of the very people she had once called her neighbors. The house itself seemed to be decaying under the weight of the haunting. A pervasive chill clung to the air, even on warm days, and a faint, unpleasant odor, sometimes described as smelling of decay, would manifest and then vanish without a trace. The atmosphere was thick with tension and a palpable sense of malevolence. The family's initial disbelief had long since given way to a grim acceptance of their reality. They were no longer questioning if something was happening. They were simply trying to survive it day by terrifying day. Their home had become a prison, and the entity that shared it with them was a cruel and unpredictable warden. As the story of the strange happenings on Green Street began to spread, it inevitably attracted the attention of the press. Reporters from local and national newspapers descended on Enfield, eager for a sensational story. Their arrival brought a new level of chaos to the Hodgsons' lives, but it also brought the case to the attention of the Society for Psychical Research, a London-based organization dedicated to the scientific study of paranormal phenomena. The Society for Psychical Research dispatched two of its members, Maurice Grosse and Guy Leon Playfair, to investigate the claims.
I arrived in September 1977, just hoping to help in any way I could. After losing my own daughter, I found myself drawn to these unexplained events. I wanted to see for myself what was happening at 284 Green Street.
Maurice Grosse was a patient and methodical investigator. He spent countless hours at the house, setting up tape recorders and cameras, determined to capture definitive proof of the phenomena. He quickly gained the trust of the Hodgson family, who were relieved to finally have someone who took their claims seriously.
I witnessed marbles and other small objects flying across the room, seemingly from nowhere. There were loud, rhythmic knocks that would answer my questions, and I saw furniture move on its own. Honestly, I became convinced that the family was being tormented by a genuine poltergeist.
Soon after, Grosse was joined by Guy Leon Playfair, a writer and experienced paranormal researcher who had studied similar cases in Brazil.
I'll admit I was pretty skeptical at first. I knew how easily these situations could involve fraud or just plain misinterpretation. But as I spent more time in the house, my skepticism started to fade. I saw a heavy sofa levitate, and I watched a fireplace grate get torn from its moorings. There were these intense cold spots that would just appear out of nowhere. And then there were the strange, disembodied voices coming from Janet. It was honestly unlike anything I'd ever encountered.
The two investigators worked tirelessly, often staying overnight, cataloging over 1,500 separate paranormal incidents over the course of their 18-month investigation. The presence of Gross and Playfair provided the Hodgsons with a small measure of comfort and support, but it did little to quell the activity. In fact, the phenomena seemed to intensify in the presence of the investigators, as if the entity was putting on a performance for its new audience. The researchers meticulously documented everything they saw and heard, filling notebooks with detailed observations and collecting hours of audio recordings. Their goal was not just to help the family, but to understand the nature of the force that had taken over their home. They were no longer just dealing with knocks and moving furniture. They were about to come face to face with a voice from the other side. One of the most disturbing and honestly famous aspects of the Enfield case was the emergence of these disembodied voices. After several weeks of knocks and moving objects, a new and much more direct form of communication began to take shape. The sound started as these guttural barks and whistles, and strangely enough, they seemed to come from the direction of Janet and Margaret. Pretty soon, those noises evolved into a deep, gravelly voice that was completely unlike that of an 11-year-old girl. The voice claimed to be Bill, a man who it said had died in the house years earlier. This voice would speak for hours at a time, its gruff, rasping tones captured on Grosser and Playfair's tape recorders. The voice of Bill Wilkins was a shocking development. When Janet spoke with this voice, her facial muscles wouldn't move in a normal way at all, and the sound seemed to come from deep within her chest. The voice was coarse and elderly, often using profane language and making threats. It even claimed to have died of a hemorrhage while sitting in a chair in the corner of the living room downstairs. On one recording, the voice rasped, "Just before I died, I went blind, and then I had a hemorrhage and I fell asleep, and I died in the chair in the corner downstairs." That chilling claim added a new layer of terror to the haunting, suggesting the family was dealing not just with a poltergeist, but with the spirit of a disgruntled former resident. Investigators were at first pretty skeptical that the voice was anything more than a clever trick by Janet. They carried out several tests to see if she was faking it. On one occasion, they filled her mouth with water and taped it shut, yet the voice continued to speak, its words muffled but still audible. Medical examinations showed that when the voice was speaking, Janet was using her false vocal cords, a feat that's actually pretty tough to maintain and can cause physical damage. The sheer duration and character of the voice just seemed way beyond the capabilities of a young girl. The recordings of Bill's voice remain some of the most unsettling pieces of evidence from the case. The claims made by the voice were later investigated, and it was discovered that a man named Bill Wilkins had, in fact, lived and died in the house, though the exact circumstances of his death were hard to confirm conclusively. His son, Terry Wilkins, later came forward and confirmed that his father had passed away in the house from a cerebral hemorrhage while sitting in his favorite armchair, just as the voice had described. This corroboration was honestly stunning, lending significant weight to the argument that the phenomena were genuine.
The voice of Bill was no longer just a strange noise. It was a name, a story, and a terrifying link to our house's past.
The involvement of the SPR and the escalating headline-grabbing phenomena, especially those disembodied voices, turned the Enfield poltergeist into a full-blown media sensation. Journalists from newspapers like the Daily Mirror and the Daily Mail camped outside the house, and the story was featured on television news programs. The BBC even sent a film crew to produce a documentary, capturing footage of the investigators at work and the family in distress. This intense media scrutiny brought the Hodgsons' private terror into the public eye, transforming their ordeal into a national spectacle. The family, already under immense strain, now had to deal with the constant presence of cameras, microphones, and reporters. And with all this publicity came a wave of intense skepticism.
Many people, including other paranormal researchers, were quick to dismiss the entire case as nothing more than an elaborate hoax cooked up by attention-seeking children. They pointed out that much of the activity seemed to happen when no one was looking directly, or only when the children, especially Janet, were present. Skeptics argued the moving furniture could be explained by hidden strings or vibrations, the knocking by simple trickery, and the flying objects by the kids throwing them when they thought they weren't being observed. The case became a real battleground between believers and debunkers. One of the most significant blows to the case's credibility actually came from within the paranormal community itself. Two members of the SPR, Anita Gregory and John Beloff, visited the house and came away convinced the children were faking the phenomena. They said they caught the kids bending spoons and trying to bang on the ceiling with a broom handle. There was even a video camera set up in the room to run continuously, but it was found to have been mysteriously switched off. Later, Janet admitted that she and her sister had faked some of the incidents once or twice just to see if the investigators would notice. Skeptics jumped on this as proof that the whole haunting was a fraud. But honestly, we argued it wasn't so simple. While the kids may have faked a small percentage of the events, maybe for fun or under pressure to perform for the investigators, that didn't explain the vast majority of the phenomena we witnessed firsthand. We pointed to the police officer's testimony, the corroborated details from the Bill voice, and the many incidents of heavy furniture moving on its own. In our opinion, the children's occasional tricks were a cry for attention from a family under unbearable stress, not evidence of a complete fabrication.
The debate over the authenticity of the Enfield poltergeist created a deep divide, with pretty compelling arguments on both sides. The evidence for a hoax was definitely there and couldn't be ignored.
I did admit to faking a few things, but only once or twice. Still, that cast a long shadow of doubt over everything that happened.
Skeptics argued that two clever and mischievous girls, maybe just looking for attention after their parents' divorce, could have orchestrated the whole thing. They said Janet, being a bright and imaginative kid, could have used ventriloquism to make the Bill voice, and that the girls worked together to create the illusion of paranormal activity to fool the adults. And you know, critics pointed to inconsistencies in the accounts, and the fact that the most dramatic events often happened when cameras weren't rolling or when the children were alone. Even the photo of Janet levitating was dismissed by many as just a picture of her jumping off the bed. The graininess of the old film and photography made it really tough to analyze the evidence with modern clarity, so yeah, a lot was left open to interpretation. For skeptics, every piece of evidence had a possible, if sometimes pretty convoluted, rational explanation rooted in trickery and the desire for fame.
But on the other side, the evidence for a genuine haunting was just as compelling for those who witnessed it.
Guy and I spent more time in that house than anyone, and we remained adamant that the majority of the phenomena were absolutely real. We documented hundreds of incidents, things like metal objects bending on their own, fires breaking out in drawers, and heavy furniture being moved with a force no child could manage. We argued that no child could have produced the deep, rasping voice of Bill Wilkins for such long periods without injuring their vocal cords. And more importantly, the testimony of independent witnesses, like WPC Carolyn Heaps, provided strong corroboration. The neighbors, the Nottinghams, saw things too, before any investigators were involved. And the confirmation of Bill Wilkins' death by his own son, that was something the Hodgson family would have had no way of knowing.
For believers, the sheer volume, variety and longevity of the activity, witnessed by over 30 different people, pointed not to a childish prank, but to a powerful and genuine paranormal infestation. After nearly 2 years of relentless activity, the disturbances at 284 Green Street began to subside. The knocking grew fainter, the voices fell silent, and the flying objects, well, they stayed put on their shelves. The phenomena faded away as mysteriously as they had begun, finally giving the Hodgson family a fragile sense of peace. Maurice Grosse and Guy Lyon Playfair concluded their investigation, leaving behind a mountain of tapes, photographs, and written notes that would be analysed and debated for decades to come. The family tried to move on with their lives, but the shadow of the haunting and the public attention it brought would follow them forever. In the years that followed, the Enfield Poltergeist became a cornerstone of paranormal lore, a benchmark case against which all others are often measured. It's been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and even major Hollywood films, each one re-examining the evidence and offering its own take. The central question still hangs in the air. Was it a terrifying manifestation of a restless spirit, or one of the most elaborate hoaxes ever pulled off by children? The debate continues, with believers and skeptics both holding firm, using the same set of evidence to draw wildly different conclusions.
As an adult, I've always said the haunting was real. Yes, my sister and I did fake a small number of incidents, but only because we sometimes felt pressured to produce phenomena when nothing was happening, especially with all those reporters and investigators around. We wanted to see if anyone would catch us. But that doesn't change the real terror we lived through. For me, it's not a fond memory of a childhood prank. It was a traumatic ordeal that shaped my entire life.
Today, nearly half a century after the knocking first began, the house on Green Street still stands. The story of what happened within its walls has become a modern legend, a chilling reminder that maybe there are forces in the world we just don't understand. The Enfield case endures because it's the perfect mystery. It gives you just enough evidence to make you believe, and just enough doubt to make you question everything. Whether it was the work of a troubled spirit, a psychic projection from a troubled child, or simply a clever trick, the Enfield Poltergeist remains London's most famous and haunting mystery, its secrets locked away forever within the ordinary brick walls of an extraordinary house.